Hi guys, welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about judging. This is something that you're going to hear a lot, and you probably have been hearing it from believers and unbelievers alike. People are always saying, hey, don't judge, you are judging me. Who are you to judge? Only God can judge. Is that true though? Is it only God can judge? Hey, this camera must be straight. Is it only God that can judge? And when can we judge as unbelievers? Are we to remain silent when we see sin and say, you know what, God should deal with that? I must just focus on my own self. What does the Bible actually say? Okay, so I'm gonna get into that, and we're gonna review some verses. But I think the first thing that we need to start off with is defining what does judging mean, and what do people mean when they say you're judging me. So Merriam-Webster says to judge in the verb sense is to form an opinion about something, a careful weighing of evidence and testing of premises. The second definition is to form an estimate or evaluation of something, usually in the negative sense. And the third is to hold an opinion, to guess, or to think. So when somebody says you're judging me, or that's judging, stop it. They're basically saying you formed a negative evaluation of me or evaluation of that person, and I don't like it. Because people don't usually say you're judging when you compliment them in a positive sense, right? And you say, oh, hey, I think you're a kind person. I think they're a loving person. You have judged that person. You have evaluated that person. But because it's a compliment, they welcome it. So usually people don't like you pointing out their sins. And the reason why you usually get backlash is that all John chapter 3, verse 20 actually says, all who do evil hate the light and refuse to come near it for fear that their sins will be exposed. Nobody likes to have their sins exposed, and nobody likes rebuke or correction. So I'm going to start off with Matthew chapter 7, verse 1 to 5, which is what people maybe causes confusion. People are like, okay, the Bible is saying don't judge, so what must I do? I'm just going to keep quiet. It's not my place. So, anyways, before I go to Matthew, let me say this. Before you say it's not your place to judge, because there are places in the Bible that do say you must judge. It actually says here in John chapter 7, verse 24, do not judge according to appearance, judge with righteous judgment. Okay, so there is a place. Okay, there is a place for judging. Here we are being encouraged to judge with righteous judgment. And Ephesians chapter 5, verse 10 to 11 says, carefully determine what pleases the Lord. Take no part in the worthless deeds of evil and darkness. Instead, expose them. So the Bible is encouraging us to expose darkness. You shouldn't be quiet, okay? And the Bible also says, a part of the Great Commission, right? As believers, we are supposed to share the gospel. Jesus says, go out there, make disciples, baptize them, and teach them to obey my commands. When you are teaching people, you are correcting as well. You are instructing. You are making them align to the commands of God. And when you're teaching commands, that sometimes comes with correction. And what is correction? It is to bring into conformity with a standard, right? You are basically correcting people and saying the way you're living is wrong, okay? Here is a standard. And what is our standard? The word of God. And it can be a sin to be quiet. And that's in Ezekiel chapter 13, verse 18 to 19, when God says, if I have sent you to be a watchman and to go warn people, and you don't warn those people, and they die in their wickedness, their blood will be on your head. But if you warn them and they don't listen, then you're fine. You're okay. But He has sent us, God, now all of us Christians, on this great commission to go and make disciples. How would you make disciples? How would you teach people to obey commands if there is no some sort of correction in there? So Yeah, and I think also let's look at James 5:19-20. It says, "My dear brothers and sisters, if someone among you wanders away from the truth and is brought back, you can be sure that whomever brings the sinner back will save that person from death and bring about the forgiveness of many sins." So imagine if you're quiet and somebody's wandering off into darkness. It says that you've saved them from death. So it is your place to speak. You cannot watch somebody wander off into death. You are supposed to speak. You are, and in that sense, you have to judge, right? How can you say something is wrong unless you have judged it, unless you have evaluated it, unless you have carefully examined something and estimated it? And there are other places where the Bible is like, you will know them by their fruit, right? How do you examine whether fruit is good or bad? You judge fruit. So there are so many instances of judging. Now I'm going to go into the verses that trip people up. Yeah, they do trip people up, but I think before that we can look at Ephesians chapter 4, verse 15, where it encourages us to speak the truth in love. Okay? Truth in love. So also you will encounter backlash when you're telling people the truth, whether you say it kindly or not, because people who are engaged in evil hate to have their sins exposed. So John chapter 3 verse 20 says, "All who do evil hate the light and refuse to go near it for fear that their sins will be exposed." So sometimes you will get a little backlash. And I think even in Proverbs it says, if you rebuke a fool, they will it talks about rebuking a fool and they will mock you and things like that. So it says that wise people, they welcome correction, they welcome rebuke, sort of like when David in Psalm 141 verse 5, he says he wants to be rebuked. He says he wants to be rebuked because it would be a kindness to him. Let's see that. Let's read 141 verse 5. Psalm 141 verse 5. It says, "Let the godly strike me. It will be kindness. If they correct me, it is soothing medicine. Do not let me refuse it. But I pray constantly against the wicked and their deeds." So this ought to be the posture of every Christian. This ought to be our posture where we welcome rebuke, where we welcome correction. And how can you rebuke a person? Without first judging them, right? Without first evaluating them. And David's posture was very surprising, compared to a lot of people in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament. They did not welcome correction that well. When Stephen was being stoned, well, before he was stoned, that long speech that he gave to the people of Israel, the leaders and stuff, he said, "We are stubborn people." Well, he was talking to the Israelites. He said, "You guys are stubborn and you are hard-hearted, you were deaf. Is there any prophet that you did not persecute? And you even killed some of them." So this is usually the response of people to prophets. Remember, in the Old Testament, usually the prophets were sent to herald the word of God, to correct people and to say, "Hey, you guys are falling into sin, go back to God." And Stephen is saying, "Hey, look, there is no prophet that came that you guys did not persecute. You even killed some of them." And that's usually the response of people when you bring in correction. So you will get that backlash or that pushback sometimes, but sometimes there are people like David. Sometimes there are people who say, "I want to be rebuked, I want to be corrected. It would be a kindness. Hit me now, let it hurt. Let it hurt me now, but it is a greater kindness than if you lie to me or if you keep quiet about it." So do not be discouraged because there are those who persecute prophets. I'm not saying you're a prophet. I'm just saying there are those who persecute people who speak the truth. That should not be your reason to be silent. But I think, where is it? In Proverbs chapter 9, it says, don't rebuke mockers. Sometimes you can just tell some people will not receive it. But just because some people will not receive it is not reason for you to be silent. 9. It says, don't bother correcting mockers. They will only hate you, but correct the wise and they will love you. Instruct the wise, this is verse 9 now. Instruct the wise and they'll be even wiser. Teach the righteous and they will learn even more. And this is the don't judge me people. So you see, it says, don't bother correcting mockers. Some people are mockers. But it is not an excuse for you to be silent, all in all. Because it says, but correct the wise and they will love you. Instruct the wise and they will be even wiser. Teach the righteous and they will learn even more. So let's go to the troubling scriptures that make people scared to judge. Okay, I hope I've convinced you to safely judge, but obviously there's still those scriptures that say don't judge. What do we do with those scriptures now? Because we've heard all this encouragement to judge. What do we do with these other scriptures? Okay, where is Corinthians? Okay, so Matthew chapter 7 verse 1 to 5, which is a common one. It says, do not judge others and you will not be judged, for you will be treated as you treat others. The standard you use in judging is the standard by which you will be judged. And why worry about a speck in your friend's eye when you have a log in your own? How can you think of saying to your friend, let me help you get rid of that speck in your eye, when you can't see past the log in your own eye? Hypocrite, first get rid of the log in your own eye, then you will see well enough to deal with the speck in your friend's eye. Okay, so this is like, oh, hi, then I must not say anything. I must just not judge people. No, this is talking about hypocritical judging. And sometimes we don't apply the same standards that we apply to people to ourselves. This is an example I have. You might see a teenage girl and she's pregnant. And you might say, hi, these girls are loose, They're just sleeping around. They're just careless. But you're not considering that this girl maybe had sex one time and she got pregnant and you don't know under what circumstances she got pregnant. And you would judge her and say, these girls are loose. But you are in your 30s, for example, and you've had 20 boyfriends and you slept with all of them. But you are calling this young girl a prostitute. You have become a hypocrite. Because if you first evaluate yourself and say, I have a log in my own eye. I don't think I should be throwing stones at that girl, So before we venture into areas which we ourselves are struggling in, let's first, overcome our struggles. So then we can encourage others because now we are strong in that area. Once you have overcome in that area, you can go out and teach young girls that, hey, you know what? Hey, back in my day, I used to do this. But young girls, this is the correct way. I have struggled, but I have overcome. Okay. So in terms of casting stones, John 8, verse 1 to 8, that woman caught in the act of adultery, he who is without sin, let him cast the first stone. You might also feel like, hey, I have sin. I can't be casting stones. And it's not necessarily that. I think a good example is looking back at Genesis chapter 38. If you haven't read it, go read chapter 38. It's the story of Judah and Tamar. He basically slept with her without knowing that it was her. And when it came out that she's pregnant and she indicated basically he's the one who made her pregnant, then he was ashamed. Before that, he was ready to say, she must be burned. He said, oh, my daughter-in-law has gotten pregnant, let her be burned because she has acted like a prostitute. But he did not call himself out. He didn't call himself out for sleeping with a prostitute. He was so quick to say, my daughter-in-law has behaved like a prostitute, she must be burned. But did he for a second examine himself that, wait, I sleep with prostitutes, so I must not be so quick. So don't be so quick to cast a stone. Okay? Think about yourself first. Okay? But that isn't to say we must remain silent on these things. I think we talked about exposing darkness, that we must teach people, that we must speak up. We must say the truth in love. Have I read James chapter 5? I don't know. Yeah, I think I did, when we spoke about, if you speak up, you have brought a sinner back, right? And we must speak the truth in love. Ephesians chapter 4 verse 15. And there's also James 4 verse 11 to 12, which sounds like it's discouraging us from from criticizing, from judging. It says, chapter 4, James 11 to 12, it says, don't speak evil against each other, dear brothers and sisters. If you criticize and judge each other, then you're criticizing and judging God's law. But your job is to obey the law. Do not judge whether it applies to you. God alone, who gave the law, is the judge. He alone has the power to save or to destroy. So what right do you have to judge your neighbor? And sometimes it's because as Christians, we can be overly critical of other Christians, and we must not fall into this pitfall of constantly being critical, especially on things that are not specific in the Bible. You start arguing about things that are not spelled out. I think also, is it in Romans where it talks about some people are okay celebrating certain days, and some people, as Christians, we do get into unnecessary debates and unnecessary criticism of each other. Let's not always be looking for fault. We mustn't be looking for faults in our brothers. Don't go searching for them. So I think we're almost done. I'm just looking here. Is there anything that I did not cover? Yeah. And I think the last verse is, do not be deceived. Bad company corrupts good character. In 1 Corinthians chapter 15 verse 33. How would you know that somebody is bad company? Unless you have judged them, unless you have evaluated them. So there is a need for judgment, but don't fall into the pit of criticizing fellow believers. And looking at my thumbnail, right? I do have some worldly people and some Christians there, and the worldly people are worldly, okay? And that is, okay, yes, that's in 1 Corinthians chapter 5 verse 12. The worldly people, I think this is, who is this? Is this Paul? He's saying that I'm not here to judge the unbelievers, because that's the world. They behave like the world. We should not be surprised when they behave like the world. We are to correct believers, okay? Because they are supposed to adhere to a particular standard, whereas unbelievers, they're doing what unbelievers do. So we are not necessarily called to judge unbelievers. We shouldn't just be pointing out, hey, this person is sinning here and there and there. Why are we surprised? They're unbelievers. That's what they do. So I'm looking for 1 Corinthians 15:33. Oh, no. I lied. It's 1 Corinthians 5:12. Yes. This is Paul, and he says, it isn't my responsibility to judge outsiders, right? But it certainly is your responsibility to judge those inside the church who are sinning. God will judge those on the outside. But as the scriptures say, you must remove the evil person from among you. Okay? So let's not harp on unbelievers. Let's not be constantly on them, on their case. Let's not be judging them. Let's not be constantly critiquing them, because that's what unbelievers do. They're going to unbelieve, okay? And God is the one who's going to judge them. I'm going to read that again. 1 Corinthians 5:12. It isn't my responsibility. It isn't to judge outsiders, but it certainly is your responsibility to judge those inside the church who are sinning. God will judge those on the outside, but as the scriptures say, you must remove the evil person from among you. So within the Christian church, we have the right to call out our brothers and sisters who are caught in sin and to correct them. That is to bring them to conformity with a standard. And obviously, if they refuse to conform to that standard, it says that you must remove the evil person from among you. So yeah, that is the end of this video. I hope that has brought some light, shed some light. I hope I did not confuse you. It was so hard making this video. It took me a year to make it. I just was not obedient. I was not obedient in making it. I had so many excuses. I'm glad I'm finally making it, and I'm not going to edit this video. So if you did find it helpful, please like. And if you want to share it with somebody, please go ahead and share it. Maybe it's going to help other people. It's going to liberate them to judge freely with righteous judgment. Okay, I'll see you on the next one. Bye.